the African Union Summit. We are talking about reparation and all of that. Why is this such a critical issue at this point in time for the African Union, and what does it mean for Nigeria?
Well, the theme of the year, this year, because every year there's a theme, so the theme of the year has to do with reparations, the issue of reparations. For us in Nigeria, of course, being a leader on the continent and one of the most highly respected countries, it's always bestowed on us to champion the cause of Africa. And what we've been doing since President Bola Ahmed Tinubu got elected is for his administration to be pushing for a reform of the global financial architecture, because it doesn't favor African countries. If you look at the deficit that we have in terms of infrastructure, which needs funding, agriculture, food security needs funding, education needs funding, health needs funding. For that funding, you have to go through banks. And what banks tend to do is, because of the restrictions set about by the global financial structure, we don't get enough. And we're trying to change that so that funding becomes easier, or all this rating of countries which discourages financial institutions to lend or to invest, for other countries to invest in Nigeria and Africa. We want to change that. The same thing with the global political structure, the highest of which is the United Nations Security Council. It is not democratic enough. You still have those who are considered the victors of the Second World War. They're the 5 permanent members. The other remaining 10 seats rotate. So it doesn't matter what decision or what the rest of the world wants. If one of those 5 countries vetoes what should be done there and objects, that's it. It's not done. We want to change that as well. So when we talk about reparations, we're not talking about cash transfers to African countries. No, we're looking for better ways, more intelligent ways for Africa to be compensated for what it went through during the centuries of slavery, during the decades of colonialism. We need that because it put us at a disadvantage. So essentially, this is the discussion that is going on. And there are several ways to do that. You have, for instance, special drawing rights that come through the International Monetary Fund. It was applied during the COVID crisis, where countries were allowed to draw to benefit. It's almost like free money. And a lot of these developed countries didn't even touch that. So these sort of instruments can be utilized. There are other prohibitive measures that only countries like Nigeria can speak out, and the rest of the world will pay attention. If you look at, for instance, the Basel IV regulations that calculates risk-weighted assets for banks. So in terms of, let's say, capitalization, they say, you cannot lend through one way or the other, it restricts. And when I'm talking about banks, well, I'm not just talking about commercial banks. Don't forget that there are development banks, they're DFIs, development financial institutions. So all of that restricts. And then lastly, the whole idea of risk itself. So we pay more for insurance. We pay, if you're shipping to Nigeria, you have to pay more. For insurance, you have to pay more for shipping itself.
What about climate change?
Well, climate change as well. This is another issue. So the idea is to use, let's say, the special drawing rights to fund the energy transition, because it's very expensive. The technology is still very expensive. We did not contribute to polluting the planet, and yet we're being told to stop using hydrocarbons, to stop using anything that would is construed to be polluting the planet, and yet the developed countries actually pledged to fund the transfer of technology to the developing countries during the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. They have not fulfilled that pledge. So we can use this issue of reparations towards that as well.
So how is AU trying to get the buy-in of international partners in supporting these efforts? Because it's important.
Well, it's through discussion, through persuasion, and through countries like Nigeria representing the continent at the highest decision-making tables. That's why after we finish here, I'm off to South Africa for the G20 ministerial meeting before the summit comes. Increasingly now, Nigeria is being invited to G20 meetings and summits. Even though it's not a member, we're becoming a regular. And this is happening under this administration. Hitherto, we were not really being considered. So the next step after that would be for Nigeria to become a full-fledged member of the G20. And also we have pushed, and the world has accepted, including the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, that there should be 2 seats for Africa in the UN Security Council. So we're winning the argument.
And do you think that the international community is listening? How are they reacting so far?
Well, they're listening because they don't have a choice but to listen. The critical minerals are coming out of Africa. The resources still are coming out of Africa. The rest of the world, really, in terms of investment opportunities, is more or less done. So it is Africa that still has that potential for growth. If you look at Nigeria, look at the informal sector, look at the size of it and what's going to happen moving into the future. It's all going to become formal. That transformation from informal to formal itself creates so much opportunities for investors, for other countries. So that is why they have an interest. It's not charity. They know that they stand to benefit as well.
All right. Let's look at the issue of economic development and cooperation among AU members. Tell us the initiatives that were discussed to further promote this economic development amongst the AU members.
For there to be economic development, first and foremost, there has to be peace, which is why there is a peace fund, a $400 million peace fund that was established. Nigeria played a very important role in ensuring that is in place so that wherever there is crisis, that fund would be applied, would be utilized to bring about peace. Even we have gotten contributions from that fund, fight against Boko Haram and all of that, multinational joint task force, etc. Then you have also another fund that is looking to stop crisis from happening. So it's a crisis fund that is also in place. Then you have Nigeria at the summit signing the sea lift agreement, where Africa has established a logistics base, military logistics base in Douala, next door to us, Cameroon, but so that it can deploy military equipment and personnel within a short period of time across the continent. And since we're next door, and since we also have the wherewithal, we're one of the few countries that has the naval capacity to move equipment at short notice around. So we've signed an agreement where our vessels, the big ships that we have, naval vessels, would be used to move these things around, but not for free. They will pay for it. So it's a source of revenue for Nigeria. So once you have that, if you have peace, then you talk about the actualization of the African Continental Free Trade Area. That is going to increase trade between countries. Because if you look at our continent, I think I don't know if there are new figures, but it was only about 17% of what we produce that is traded amongst us. If you look at Europe, it's 67%. If you look at Asia, it's 57%. So you can see that we need to do a lot, because we're not trading with each other. We're trading with Europe, we're trading with Asia, we're trading with America, but not ourselves.
It's a global trade.
So yeah, and that African Continental Free Trade Area is being supported by Nigeria and by Nigerian banks. They have an agreement with Zenith. Before that, they had an agreement, I think, with Access Bank, with UBA, and they are more or less adopting our Nigerian interbank settlement system, which has been in existence since 1987. This is this thing where you open your phone, you will see all the banks in Nigeria. You transfer, split second, it's gone. This helps the trade. So this is going to be PayPass, the Pan-African payment system.
Now, let's talk some more diplomacy. Now, one of the issues also discussed at the summit was the need for Africa to have a united front in global diplomacy. How is Nigeria positioning itself to drive a stronger and more cohesive foreign policy so as to lead in this process?
Well, the first step is the Tinubu administration adopted a foreign policy agenda, which is strategic autonomy that would allow us to engage with all countries. Nobody is going to bully us into siding with one bloc or the other. So
in line with our non-aligned...
Non-alignment is a continuation, reaffirming that. And the pillars of that are the 4 Ds: democracy, development, demography, and diaspora. So we approach that. And then in actualizing it, this AU outing, we made sure that we got re-elected into the Peace and Security Council, which is the most important organ in the African Union. And we're the only country when it comes to the Peace and Security Council that has managed to remain there consistent. There has to be an election, and you don't take it for granted, because the way AU elections work is, even if you are the only candidate, you have to win 2/3 of the vote. And we saw what happened to Algeria, where it was the only candidate for opposition, and it could not get the 2/3 because others decided to work and protest to block them from coming. So it's not easy. So we did that with no resources. This is the thing, because when an economy is suffering from funding challenges, one of the first areas to be cut off is diplomacy. Okay. So because people think you're just drinking tea and speaking grammar, why should we fund it? But it is very critical, very important.
It is.
We won that election. Not only that, the Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, again, the most important commissioner, because if there is no chairman, there's no deputy chairman, he acts. He becomes acting. He becomes, the highest ranking officer. That's Ambassador Bankole Adeoye. He also got re-elected. And if you see the way we were able to achieve that, again, I said no funds, no money, but yet just going out, reaching out, that's all diplomatic work, and harnessing the votes, convincing other countries to vote for us. So we've retained those positions. Bankole Adeoye is the Commissioner of Political Affairs, Peace and Security, and then Nigeria again is a member of the Peace and Security Council. And almost immediately the summit was going on, there was a meeting of the Peace and Security Council where Sudan was discussed. We have a vested interest in Sudan because as many as 8 million Sudanese are of Nigerian extraction. You have an area called Jazeera in Sudan, in between the White and Blue Niles, almost completely Nigerian. You have Darfur, Nigerian. So they're already. This is the worst humanitarian crisis happening today when it comes to displacement, refugees. So if we're not careful, Sudanese will start pouring into
To Nigeria.
because they consider Nigeria home, or
Yeah.
their second home. So these are some of the things that
Yeah, I know, because, Honorable Minister, the issue of peace and security is very, very germane, very vital. Because, earlier on you talked about the need for us to have peace, especially in the continent. And the issue of terrorism, cybercrime, Boko Haram, all that, is just having a negative impact, on the continent. So what progress do you think the AU has actually made progress when it comes to the issue of peace and security, agenda in the continent? And what challenges, do you think remain to be tackled in promoting stability and security across the continent?
the African Union has made significant progress, in part because of the pivotal role that Nigeria and countries like Nigeria are playing. If you look at what is going on in South Sudan, for instance, the quarrel is more or less settled. It's just a matter of supporting them to conclude, and they're well on their way. And it was Nigeria that initiated the discourse, how to settle the quarrel in South Sudan. Look at Gabon. Gabon is about to have elections. It's transitioning. And as soon as it has elections, it's going to be allowed back into the African Union. At the moment, it's suspended because of the unconstitutional change of government that took place there. So it is. We sometimes focus on the negative, and that's what those from the outside looking in like to do, and that's what they use to hype up our rating. That stops us from getting funding, getting business, and everything. So we become so scary. They say there's political risk, there's financial risk. Oh, don't even visit. No tourism. No. We are doing significant things in the African Union that are settling quarrels and bringing about peace and progress.
Just before we let you go, in recent years, African countries have been caught, between superpowers. Is it US, China, Russia? Just how much of a disruptive influence have this been?
It has been quite disruptive, and that's why for Nigeria, strategic autonomy is very important. What would have happened if we had just blindly followed America, for instance, or blindly followed Russia? See them now in Riyadh. They were there yesterday, sitting, talking to each other, saying, look, let's just settle this quarrel and move on. Forget about even Europe. Ukraine was not there itself. They have moved on. So we have to be smart about these things, and we have to focus on our strategic national interests. And this is what we're doing. And lastly, it's important to also point out that those that emerged as leaders in the African Union, the chairperson, the deputy chairperson, they emerged, they got there by relying on Nigeria and its goodwill to harness votes and support for them. So very, very important, because others that didn't make it. So, and we are supporting a new leadership in the African Union so that there will be reform, because there's so much wastage, and we're a tier 1 country. We contribute the highest to the African Union, and that's why we have a vested interest for it to be more efficient and efficacious.
Right, Ambassador Yusuf Maitama Tugar, Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs. It's been a pleasure having you join us on Good Morning Nigeria. Thank you for your perspectives on the issues.
Thank you for having me.